Hi, I'm Anita Moorjani, and I'm an author of several books. Some of you may know me through my book, Dying to Be Me, where I share my story of my journey through cancer and then a near-death experience and then a rapid healing. In my story, I speak about my true life experience of where I had lymphoma, and which spread over a course of 4 years until I actually died. I crossed over, and where I realized it wasn't my time, and I also learned why I had been sick. And I then came out of the coma and my body healed very, very rapidly. Well, today I want to talk to you about being an empath, because one of the things that I discovered after coming out from the other side and after healing over the last few years, I discovered that I'm an empath. And so I'd like to speak to you about it because I believe that so many of you who are attracted to this kind of work, if you are attracted to these kinds of seminars and these kinds of courses, chances are you are an empath. And that's what I'd like to focus on today. First of all, let me explain to you what an empath is. An empath is someone who's very sensitive to the surroundings around them. You're sensitive to the emotions of other people. You're very intuitive. You can feel what other people are feeling, and you feel the energies around you. Now, there's a little difference between just being sensitive and being an empath. And here's the difference. An empath actually feels those feelings in their body as if they are going through it themselves. In other words, an empath sometimes takes on the emotions of other people, whereas someone who's just sensitive or who's just intuitive, they know what other people are going through, but they may not take it on in their own body. And what happens when you're an empath, you need other people to feel good so that you can feel good yourself, because you're feeling their emotions. So when you're feeling someone's pain, you need them to feel good because you're feeling it as though it's your pain. And so you start going out of your way to help those people to feel good because it feels like it's your pain. And I'm sure as I'm speaking this, that some of you probably relate to exactly what I'm saying. And what ends up happening is that empaths, many of them, end up becoming people pleasers because you always want to please other people because you want them to feel good so that you can feel good. Let me give you some examples of what it means to be an empath and what it means to feel things in your own body. When I was young, I had no idea I was an empath. In fact, I had no idea until just a few years ago. So I grew up not realizing that I'm absorbing energies that are not mine. And many of you are probably doing that too, which is why it's really important for me to share what I'm sharing today. So one time I remember when I was young, when I was a teenager, my family, we were watching a movie on TV together, family evening, watched a movie. And back then in those days, we didn't have streaming TV. We didn't have, it was even before the VCR, the video cassette recorder. So you literally just watched the movie that was on that night. And so in that movie, as we were all watching, there was a woman who got in her car and she was driving, and then she had a head-on car crash. And she was not wearing a seatbelt for some reason, and she just flew through the windscreen. And when she flew through the windscreen, her face smashed through the glass, the windscreen. And I'm sorry to be describing this, but her face became completely cut up, and she was rushed to the hospital. She survived, she lived, but her face was all bandaged up, and she was really, really scared as to what she would look like when the bandages came off. And the doctors warned her it was going to be really bad and she would need lots of surgery. At some point while watching this, I remember feeling awful for the woman. But what happened is I actually fainted. I blacked out while I was with my family. My family panicked when they looked at me because I started to just, my head was spinning and then whoop, I was out. So my family were like, oh my God, what's wrong? And my mother went and got some sugar from or some honey from the kitchen, and she gave me a spoonful of honey, and they gave me something to smell and to bring me out of it. And they did not relate, and neither did I. None of us related the fact that I fainted because I was feeling so intensely for that woman on the screen, even though she was only acting. I did not relate it until very recently, when I was thinking back, because when I started to realize that I'm an empath, I started to understand a lot of the things in my life that contributed to me being sick. I realized that, oh my gosh, there was a sign back then. When I fainted, my family all thought that my blood sugar was low. My mother said, oh, I'm going to take you to the doctor tomorrow. But the next day I was fine, and she didn't take me to the doctor. But that scene of that woman, and also what she looked like when the bandages came off, that stayed with me for a very long time. It actually impacted me physically. I felt it in my own body as if it was mine. And it's like your muscles tense up. But I didn't realize it. It was very, in a way, on an unconscious level, unless I think back on it. And we all thought it was just random that I suddenly fainted in that moment. So anyway, so that's an example of being an empath. More recently, one of my team members, one of my team who works with me, she was telling me about how she suffers from eczema from time to time. Eczema, which is like having a skin rash, except that she's had it since childhood, except whenever it flares up. So it flares up and then it settles down, and it flares up when she's under stress, it flares up. But whenever she's had it, it happens to her behind her ears, on her scalp, but just behind her ears. And it's always been in that same spot every time she gets it. And she gets it when she's under stress, and she's aware of it. And so she works at keeping her stress levels down. Anyway, one day recently, a neighbor of hers came over to talk to her, because the neighbor knew that my assistant gets eczema from time to time. So the neighbor came over and said, I have really bad eczema, and I was wondering if I could ask your advice. And so the neighbor showed her, it was on her arm. So she lifted, she pulled up her sleeve all the way up over her, above her elbow. And she said, here, look at this. And apparently it was actually pretty bad. And so my assistant kind of went, oh, wow. And then she gave her all the advice and tips and everything that she could about how to help it and soothe it and alleviate it. Anyway, what happened is the next day, my assistant, she woke up and she noticed that she had a little bit of eczema just around her thumb and her finger, just on her hand. She never had eczema in that spot before. She wasn't even experiencing eczema the previous days, but after empathizing with her neighbor, the next day this shows up on her hand. So this is what happens, and it's really important for you to know this, and for people, for doctors and so on, to start recognizing this, and for us to realize that empaths need to be treated differently, not just in medicine, not just in terms of illness and wellness, but in a lot of things, because we process the world differently. We process it by taking it on in our bodies. And so we need to develop tools not to do that. When I was in my near-death experience state, in other words, when I was on the other side, I was able to understand what it was in my life, like all the thoughts, the decisions, the choices I had made in my life. I was able to understand how it had contributed to my illness. And one of the things that I realized was that, was like, for example, when I was, when my best friend, she was diagnosed with cancer like 2 years before I had my own diagnosis. She was my best friend. She was like a sister to me. She was the same age as me. We grew up together. And this was back in about 2002. Or 2000, the year 2001, somewhere there. She was my best friend, and she was diagnosed with a form of cancer. It came as a shock to me. You know, I could feel it within me. And at that time, as I said, I did not know I was an empath. I did not take any precautions or think anything in that way. All I could think of is, how can I make her feel better? How can I make her feel better? So I knew that she felt much more cheerful when I was with her. So I went on the journey with her. I would go to the hospital with her. I would be with her when she was going for treatments. But her health continued to deteriorate. As she deteriorated, I felt her pain and I felt her fear. And every time I would when I would go off to do things for myself, if I would go and want to cheer myself up, or go and maybe go shopping and buy some nice clothes, or go for a walk, go out in nature, I would feel guilty that I was not spending time with her and making her feel better or cheering her up. This was not her fault. This was totally me. It was me that felt, oh my gosh, she's suffering in hospital and here I am trying on beautiful clothes. I shouldn't be doing this. How selfish of me. And then I would go and I would be by her side. And this continued for a long time until one day I found a lump on my neck and I went to the doctor and I received my own diagnosis of lymphoma, which is lymphatic cancer. Now here's what happened. My emotions inside. On the one hand, there was fear because I feared cancer. I feared the cancer. I even feared the treatments for cancer because I was watching her go through what she was going through. And as I had watched her go through all that pain and the treatment, I was going deeper and deeper into that fear. But so here I was now with my own diagnosis. But in addition to the fear, here's the interesting part. There was a part of me that felt, now I have a reason to take care of myself. In other words, I needed an illness to give me a big enough reason to now start taking care of myself instead of constantly focusing on her suffering and her health and her sickness. So it was only when I had this cancer diagnosis of my own was I actually able to free myself from constantly being with her. I now had a reason to say, oh, I need to do this to uplift myself because I need to do this to make myself healthier. I need to do this for me. And I was not able to do that before. And I was someone who needed that reason. And so slowly I was able to extricate myself from her suffering and her pain. So the big message I have for you, if you are an empath, that you should not get to the point where you feel you need a disease in order to heal. And if you feel that you need a disease in order to heal, for example, if you need a disease in order to be true to yourself, because for me it was that. I was suppressing what I really needed because the part of me that wanted her to be well, I allowed that to be the louder part of me. I was suppressing the real me, which wanted to be out in the sun. The real me wanted to be free. It wanted to go and find my joy and my passion. It didn't want to be there suffering alongside of someone. The real me underneath wanted to be a light so that I could be the light that uplifts others. So the more that you need an excuse like a disease in order to be yourself, the more that your body will hold on to the disease, because there is no incentive for the body to heal, because the body is wise, it's smart. The body knows that if it heals, you will again feel obligated to just please other people. You will again feel guilty to just serve other people who are suffering. So unless you allow yourself to be authentic and to find your joy, the body will have no incentive to heal. You need to allow yourself to find that joy. You need to tell yourself that if I have a clean bill of health tomorrow, what is it that I would do? And then start doing it. Start celebrating your life so that your body has an incentive to heal. It was only after I died that I learned that being myself and loving myself and following my passion and discovering who I am and what I am authentically, only after I died did I realize that all of these things is my birthright. It is my birthright to love myself. Even when others are suffering, it is my birthright to follow my passion. And the reason is because I am an expression of the universe or God. We all are. You are, I am, we all are. And when we don't love ourselves, when we don't realize that we have a calling and we have a passion and that we came here to be authentic, what we're doing is that we are denying God or the universe to express itself through us. That's what we're doing. I understood how all my thoughts and decisions led up to me being on that hospital bed dying. I understood how I had done this by not realizing that I am an empath and that I absorb things really easily. I had denied that part of who I am. I didn't understand it, I didn't know it, and the world never taught it to me. Nobody taught it to me. We live in a world where you don't learn that. You don't know that as a child. So that's why I've made it my mission to teach it to people who are empaths, to tell you how important it is to know this, so that you don't have to get sick and die before discovering it. I don't want you to go through what I went through. So I'm going to share with you how you can prevent this. So I hope that you're relating to what I've said so far. And I know that if you are an empath who feels too much and who cares too much, you will feel it. And one of the things, as I said earlier, I know is that people who are attracted to this kind of work, and if you've been listening to me so far, if you stuck out this video up to now, then I'm pretty sure you are an empath. So now, a question that I get, so let's talk about why it is that empaths get sucked down this road of becoming people pleasers, and we end up giving our power away and we become drained and sick. So let's unpack how that even happened to me, and then you can probably apply it to yourself. One of the questions that people ask me is they say, were you spiritual before your near-death experience, or did you only become spiritual after? Here's my answer. I was really spiritual before my near-death experience. And what I have to say is actually going to be very provocative and controversial. I would say that I was extremely spiritual, and it was because I was spiritual that I ended up giving all my power away and ended up being that person who was lying there on that hospital bed. When I came out of the near-death experience, I learned a very different form of spirituality. So let me explain. One of the things that I learned when I was growing up, you see, I used to follow a lot of spiritual teachers, conventional spiritual teachers and gurus and so on. I'm not saying they're all bad. They're not bad. What they're telling you is true and it's correct. But if you are an empath, you really have to look at the world very differently. All the teachings that I was getting from the time I was a child was that it is selfish to love yourself. I was getting teachings like you have to be of service. It is spiritual to be of service. You have to give of yourself. It is selfish to receive. And also I learned that you have to suppress your ego. The ego is bad. And the other thing I learned is that we always have to give of ourselves, and no matter where we are in life, we have to always even give for free. We have to serve and give for free. So I used to follow all of these things. I was extremely spiritual. I would give even what I didn't have, and I was always conscious of being of service. I was somebody who wanted to do creative work. I wanted to do art. I wanted to teach. I wanted to be in the healing arts as well. But one of the things that I had trouble doing was I had trouble charging for my work. So I struggled there. The other thing was that because I always learned that the ego is bad, so I suppressed my ego. Whenever I had any needs at all, I would suppress my ego to the point of making myself invisible. This is why I was able to serve everybody else and not take care of myself. I would feel guilty if I did anything for myself when someone else was suffering, but I thought I was spiritual. I thought I was good. I thought that everything I was doing was going to give me a better afterlife or a better next life. I thought I was building up really good karma because all I was doing was serving and being there for everyone and not charging people. And I would always believe that the ego is evil. And so I never allowed myself to be who I truly was, thinking that's the ego rearing its head. So in the conventional sense, I was very, very spiritual. What I learned after dying and coming back is that conventional spirituality does not work for empaths. Those messages of suppressing your ego and doing things for free and being of service are really good for the general population you see out there. Because when you look out at the world, when you are not in this genre of spiritual teachers and so on, when you look out in the world, when you read the papers or you watch the news or you look at what's happening outside, the generalization, people, especially our politicians, they are the ones that need those messages. They are the ones that need to learn more compassion and empathy, and they need to learn to be more giving. People who are at the heads of corporations and so on, they are the ones who need to learn that. But if you are an empath, you need a very different type of spirituality. And so here is the spirituality that I propose for empaths. If I am a spiritual teacher for empaths, here's what I would teach you. I would teach you that as an empath, you need to learn to receive. That's number one. You need to receive, because if you don't receive, you're not in the flow. Because for you, giving comes easier. Most empaths are unable to receive. So you have to work on your receiving muscle. You need to strengthen your receiving muscle, because if you don't receive, you will be empty and you won't be able to give. You will become depleted. Because here's the thing I want you to realize. Receiving is different from taking. That's two very different energies. The universe is constantly feeding you and giving you. If you shut off your receiving channel, you're not even able to receive the gifts from the universe. The gifts from the universe come to us through other people acting as messengers and angels of God. And so if you can't receive from other people, it means you cannot receive from the universe. So you have to learn to receive. And as I said, and I'm going to repeat it, the universe is gifting you all the time, but you are not seeing it because your receiving channel is closed. And this is the case for most empaths. So to open this receiving channel, the exercise I give you, I invite you every single day, allow yourself to receive something, even if it's something that you do for yourself, even if it means taking time out from a busy day just to go for a walk or to listen to music. Do something that brings you pleasure every single day, or eat something that's fun to eat, or go and buy yourself a little something small, even if it's a tiny thing like a flower, or go out and pick some flowers. Do something that's just a gift to yourself every day. That'll help you open the receiving muscle so you can learn to receive the gifts from the universe. So that's the number one thing I suggest, is empaths need to learn to receive. Number two, empaths need to be encouraged to develop a healthy ego. Don't listen to the messages that tell you that you have to suppress the ego or the ego is bad. For an empath, you have the opposite problem. And here's how I would like to explain it. Ego is different from egotistical. Everybody has an ego. But here's how I want you to think of it. Think of it as a scale. On one end of the scale is zero ego. In the middle of the scale is ego, is healthy ego. So you have an ego, and that's where you want to be. At the other end of the scale is what I call egotistical. Now, egotistical people, because they're egotistical, they have the loudest voices among us. So they are the ones that you see the most. So for example, people who have big egos, who are on the egotistical end of the scale, are the ones that you will see taking on leadership positions. They're the ones who will be out on the front lines. They're the ones who will become the politicians and the leaders. And so the world is very familiar with egotistical people. So most spiritual teachers, in their belief that they are doing good for the world, they go out and say, suppress your ego. The ego is evil. Because when people are egotistical, they get into power-hungry positions and then they start to exploit other people. Because what egotistical means, it means putting yourself before others. And so the spiritual messages are targeted at egotistical people, and because those are the loudest voices among us. Those are what we see when we look out into the world. And so the spiritual messages say, don't let your ego get in the way of you. Suppress your ego. Don't have a big inflated ego. Now, here's the thing. On the other end of the scale, you have the people with no ego. These are the empaths. What is unfortunate is that the empaths are the people who have empathy and compassionate for everyone around them. But because they have no ego, because they are the ones receiving the message to suppress your ego, they are the ones hiding in the shadows. They are the ones suppressing their ego, so nobody is hearing them. And so they're not out there in the world sharing their compassion because their ego is repressed. And where it gets interesting is that most of the teachers out there who are saying suppress your ego, what they don't realize, and this is not their fault, what they don't realize is that they actually have a healthy ego themselves, because that healthy ego is what allows them to share that message. But the people at the egotistical end of the scale are not attracted to spiritual teachers. They're not the ones receiving the message. The empaths are attracted to spiritual teachings. All of you tuning in right now who are empaths, you're still tuned in because you're listening to me. So I know that if you're still listening to me, you're an empath. all of you are attracted to spiritual teachings. And so the message to suppress your ego is landing on the empaths, whereas the empaths are the ones who actually need to expand your ego to get to a state from no ego to healthy ego. Most empaths are somewhere between healthy ego all the way down to no ego. An empath would find it very hard to become egotistical because they are hardwired to put the other person first. That is what it is to be an empath. An empath is hardwired to feel the emotions of other people. An empath is hardwired to feel them as if they are their own emotions. So it will never be that an empath will not help other people. And it's a given, you just will. So you need to develop your ego so that, for several reasons that you need to develop your ego. One is so that you can start caring and nourishing for yourself. You can start taking care of your own well-being. And number two is that when you have a healthy ego, you can start stepping in to some of those leadership positions so that you can teach people or help people from a bigger platform. Because at the moment, the biggest platforms are given to those who are at their most egotistical, because those are the ones that are out there with the loudest voices. The empaths, we need to develop our egos so that we can have a louder voice. And that's the only way that we can change the balance of this world and to make this world more empathic and more compassionate and more sensitive. It's when the empaths develop a bigger ego so that you're willing to step out and be seen and be heard and start up things like conscientious companies and corporates. Because an empath would never have a sweatshop or exploit people. It would hurt them to do so. So that was number two. Empaths need to develop a healthy ego. Number three, empaths need to learn to develop a stronger and healthier relationship with money and abundance. If you are somebody that cares about people and cares for people as a healer, teacher, light worker, or anyone, even a conscious business person, you need to have a good relationship with money, because most empaths really struggle with receiving money. And here's what happens. When you struggle with receiving money, you become destitute, then you can't help other people. People who are not empaths, who are on the other end of the scale of ego scale, they're egotistical, they're not empaths, they have no trouble making money. And here's the problem. Because they are more self-serving and they have no trouble making money, what happens is the empaths feel exploited, they feel resentful, they feel angry, and in that we start to feel physical symptoms, we start to get sick. The way out for us empaths is to understand that we can come into our own power when we start to develop these three things, when we start to develop our muscle to learn to receive gifts, that it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. And when we start to learn to develop our ego, because those spiritual teachings don't apply in the same way to empaths. And when we start to be okay with receiving money or earning money for the work we do. And we need to be okay with all of these, because an empath is the type of person that when they receive money, when they earn money, they will use it for the good of the planet. I would much rather an empath be financially successful than for somebody who is more egotistical or a narcissist to be financially successful, because I know that an empath will put it to good use. An empath will use it to help uplift the planet. And so what we need to realize is that we need to actually develop a different kind of spirituality that is for the 21st century, a very different paradigm than what we've been following in the past, if we actually want to create a more compassionate world. Instead of constantly putting out messages that say it's bad to receive, it's greedy to earn money, or that you have to suppress your ego, or you have to serve, instead of constantly putting out messages like that, I believe that the new spirituality needs to actually empower empaths. It needs to empower the people, so that the empathic people, so that they can step out and so that they can actually take on more leadership roles, and they can actually have more wealth and power in the world to change the balance. And before I finish, I would like to give you a little affirmation or meditation, which I would love for you to say to yourself every day to help you with this. But also, I'd like to just give you a little recap that the 3 things you need to remember for this new spirituality that I like to talk about is that empaths need to learn to receive. That's number 1. Number 2, empaths need to be encouraged to develop a healthy ego. Ego is good. It is not bad. Having an ego does not make you egotistical. Having no ego, in fact, is really bad for you and it's unhealthy. And number 3, empaths need to learn to develop a stronger relationship with money and abundance, and know that money in and of itself is not evil. It can be used for good just as much as it can be used for bad. Many spiritual teachings have taught us that money is the root of all evil. That's not the case, because right now the world seems to function on money, and I would rather good people have money. And when the good people believe money is the root of all evil, what we end up doing is we're giving our power away to those who are actually using it for exploitation. So those are the 3 things. And here is the meditation that I would like to share with you. And I would like you to say this every evening before going to bed, or every morning when you wake up. And please feel free to take a screenshot of this. And it says, I allow myself to receive in all ways, as I am worthy and deserving. I am serving the world when I nourish myself in every way, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. While I become more healthy, abundant, and joyful, my light shines brighter and brighter. The world needs my light. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to seeing you soon, somewhere on the internet or in the physical world. Bye.